My name is Anna. I am 14 years old, and not so long ago, my family and I moved to a very unusual place. Have you ever heard anything about Chernobyl? In short, this is a city in the Ukraine, and it is famous for its accident that occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant 34 years ago. As a result of the disaster, there was a huge, powerful release of radioactive substances, and the city was recognized as dangerous. Many people had to be evacuated from there. Dad said that people thought that all this was temporary, and soon they would go back to their homes, which had to be abandoned as a matter of urgency, as well as their belongings, but unfortunately, no one ever returned. And now, more than 30 years have passed, and my fanatical geologist father was still working on some project that he never told my mother and me about. One day, he came home from work and told my mother and I to pack our things. To our questioning look, he only replied that we are moving to Chernobyl. I didn't want this, and neither did my mother, but we both didn't dare say something in spite of my father, because he was a very strict man. Personally, I was always afraid of him. I don't know about my mother. I loved our little house because that's where I was born and raised. I had friends at school and on the street. I liked to go to school, come home after school, eat something delicious, and run outside. I usually did my homework with my mother in the evenings. We hardly saw my father because he was always busy at work. Well, my mother and I were fine with that. When he was at home, we felt tense. I was even afraid to leave the room. In general, my dad is not bad, just did not communicate much with us, and often scolded me or did not pay any attention to me at all. That is why, when he said we were moving, my mother and I kept our indignation and protests to ourselves. Mom silently got up and went to pack her things, and I went to get mine. We left the next morning and took few suitcases with us. We arrived at the place in 3 to 4 days, and it was a terrible road. My father was silent all the way, and my mother and I didn't really talk. We were allowed in with special passes. When we arrived at the place, a sad picture opened up in front of me. In this city, in my city, there were much fewer people. Yes, people still lived there, and there are even working shops, but most of the territory is empty. The houses are very old and ugly. Many of the courtyards have long been overgrown with grass. I was afraid to enter the city. What if we get infected with radiation there? And then what happens? Will I start glowing at night? Or what if I grow a third hand? But my father said it was important to his work, so it wasn't discussed. We were given an apartment in an even more depressing area, where there were no children, no playgrounds, not really anything at all. We went to the apartment and nothing seemed to have changed since the accident. I wanted to cry. My mother and I were left to clean up and sort things out, and my father said it was necessary for him to leave, without even saying where. We scrubbed the apartment for about 4 or 5 hours. All this time, my mother asked me how I was feeling. She was worried about me, but I didn't want to upset her, so I said that everything was fine. In the evening, after dinner, my mother and I decided to take a walk around the area. When we went outside, we saw 2 people. They were also going somewhere. They looked at us and passed us, guns in their hands. It's probably normal to go armed here. After walking around the courtyard, we found a lot of interesting toys and even equipment on the ground. I really wanted to touch something or take it for myself, but my mother wouldn't let me. I asked what would happen to us now, but she said she hoped for the best. Then I saw the children's slides and I wanted a ride. I sat down and went down. I was having fun. The third time, I suddenly heard a terrible roar, and a dog was running at me. She barked and growled horribly, looked at me, and foamed at the mouth. I was going down the hill right into her mouth, and I couldn't slow down. At that moment, my mother rushed towards us, but she was too far away. I already thought I'd lose my head. Suddenly, there was a shot in the air. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the dog was lying dead, and not far away were those men with guns who passed us. "This isn't an amusement park. We advise you not to leave the house, but rather to go far away and forever," they told us. My mother grabbed my arm. I thanked them and we ran home. In the evening, my mother began to cry, saying that we would not live like this for long. When my father came home, she first raised the question of whether to leave. Dad didn't like it. He got so tense right away, and I jumped in. I told him that I was almost eaten by a dog, so my father stopped talking and then told us to keep our heads down and go to bed. At this point, I realized that this is for a long time, so I decided to adapt and find ways to survive here. First of all, my mother and I sealed up all the windows, hung a cloth behind them so that no one could see anything, and put tools for self-defense at the entrance, because stray dogs sometimes broke into apartments. Dad said we won't be here for long, but we'll have to stay for a while. A week later, I wanted to go to the station where the explosion took place. That day, my mother also went on business with my father. I didn't want to stay at home, especially since I lived here. Why not see the station with my own eyes? I gathered some warm clothes and went there on the map. It turns out that it was not so easy to get through, since there were security guards and some tourists. But I still managed to get as close as possible in a roundabout way. I took a few photos as a keepsake, and then I saw an interesting doll. She was so beautiful, I wanted to keep her. But security noticed me. They called to me, and I got scared and started running. They quickly caught up with me and began to take away the camera. I resisted, but they were stronger. I was taken to a building and left in an office. It was like an interrogation that I didn't know how to answer. In the end, they shook my mother's phone off of me and called her. My parents were already at home, and my mother was hysterical from not knowing where I was. Anyway, she and Dad came to pick me up, and my dad was so angry. I realized that at home, I would be scolded. "You will leave tomorrow," he said at home. We couldn't believe our ears. I was so happy, and Dad said it was a mistake to bring us along. He added that he thought we were interested in his work, but this was not the case. To be honest, I didn't care, so I just went and started packing. We left the next day, and Dad still stayed. All I knew was that I would never go back there again. Would you like to visit Chernobyl?
Every girl having flaws in appearance dreams of correcting them. I'm no exception. I really didn't like my nose. It marred my face, distorted all my beauty. All the nose first, then she jokes are about me. My dissatisfaction with the years only accumulated, and then one day I exploded and decided to have plastic surgery. My name is Kat, by the way. Many people now think that I may be too critical of myself, that I have low self-esteem, or I have nothing stupid to do, but this is not the case. Since early childhood, I began to complex this potato on my face. Every time I looked at fashion magazines or music videos, I only paid attention to the nose of models and stars. Have you ever seen Miss Universe have a nose bigger than her face? No. Even in fairy tales, princesses always had everything in proportion. It seems that only my parents admired their daughter's beauty. My mother said I was making it up, but I knew she was calming me down. But no, there was another person, my classmate Jim. He's my best friend and always said I was too fixated on my nose. He was a devoted friend and could find the right words in a bad mood. So, last summer I had a birthday, and closer to this date, my parents asked what gift I would like to get. Well, I didn't hesitate to answer, plastic surgery! Mom and Dad were taken aback. They began to complain that the ugliness of my nose was just a fantasy, and again began to shower meaningless compliments. I was firm in my choice and said that I would still do the operation. After a couple days of persuasion, they agreed. I found a clinic myself. It was one of the best in our city. I made an appointment for a consultation with a doctor, after which I was assigned the day of the operation. I went there with my mother. I was still terribly excited and scared because I had never been on the operating table in my life. The doctor put a mask on my face and told me to count to 10. I fell asleep on the number 7. I remember dreaming that I wake up and see that the doctors made my nose even bigger, even uglier. It's like I come to class and my classmates are laughing at me and everyone has a potato instead of a head. Then I look in the mirror and I see that I also have potatoes. I screamed and woke up in a cold sweat, and my mother immediately began to comfort me. It turns out that I began to recover from the anesthesia and I imagined all sorts of things. My face was bandaged. It was painful, and terrible edema prevented me from fully moving my face, eating, and talking. Then everything healed well, and finally when the last bandages were removed, I saw my reflection in the mirror in all its glory. They made me the nose I wanted. The nose, not the nose. Now my face looked feminine and neat, and I felt pretty as hell. I didn't tell anyone about my change except Jim. He was terribly upset, but I didn't care. The operation just fell on summer holidays, so I have enough time to recover more or less and get used to the new image. My classmates were initially offended that I did not communicate with them and generally disappeared for a while, but I wanted to surprise them. After staying at home for a while, the first thing I did was call my friends and ask them to go for a walk. Before that, I dressed up. I felt changes not only outside, but also inside me, so I decided to change the image as well. Finally, everyone will know that I am beautiful and stop laughing at me. That night, I appeared to the girls completely different, a new cat. Everyone was delighted. I received a lot of compliments, and they were all real, sincere. I wanted to walk and walk so that everyone could see the new me, confident. In general, that evening, I had unforgettable emotions. I came home in full ecstasy. I was smiling like never before and still couldn't get enough of my reflection. The next day, Jim came to see me. He's probably the only one who messed it up. He said that I looked better before, that I shouldn't have made such sacrifices for the opinion of spoiled classmates, called me characterless, and left. I couldn't believe. I thought he was my best friend. We were friends for so many years. I always helped him with his studies, was there when it was necessary, and he dares to come to my house and just spoil the mood? Get out of here! If you don't like the new me, you don't have to talk. I really need you after this. You can't even be happy for me like our classmates. I shouted at him. Jim listened to everything and then turned away and started to leave, but said in the end, "You were always beautiful, especially inside yourself. The operation disfigured not only your nose, but all of you. You always cared about the opinions of your spoiled classmates. They don't care about you," he shouted. I hated him for saying that and sent him away. We didn't speak for the rest of the holidays. Then school started, and we met at school. Despite the incident with Jim, I had to be on top. So I dressed up as prettily as possible and came to school. The day before, I imagined walking into the classroom and all eyes would be directed in my direction. It was very exciting. Finally, I will be the most beautiful and my classmates will stop laughing at me. But as soon as I entered, instead of exclamations of admiration, I heard a giggle. My smile disappeared from my face. I didn't understand what was happening or why they were laughing. I was supposed to be the most beautiful. Then the teacher came into the classroom and interrupted my train of thought. At the end of the lesson, I was approached by the same classmates who we met on vacation. They said I would never be one of them. "You will always be nosy cat to us," one of them whispered sarcastically. I was alone again. I couldn't hold back my tears. Hysterical, I went home and locked myself in my room. I was so disappointed, and I don't know who I was most angry at, myself or them. In the evening, Jim came to see me. He said that he saw everything and reminded me again how real I am. "I told you you were beautiful inside and out. It doesn't matter if you have an operation. Is it important for what? To become better for yourself or to win the attention of worthless people?" he asked. I thought about his words and realized that what really matters is not so much external changes as internal ones. And my life after the operation clearly showed this.